Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's start. Yeah, welcome back. Hope you already had two very interesting and also maybe social and exploring first 2 days of the summer school of SICT. I hope you were able already to make friends and connections and also go see Grenoble a little bit, and that the talks so far and panels were interesting to you. One announcement that I would like you to not drink any drinks other than water outside of the lunchroom, right? So please don't bring tea or soft drinks or anything or food into this room, okay? So if you have water, feel free to drink it here, but please nothing else. Okay, but yeah, back to today, back to the theme of today. Today we will be moving in the space of between post-growth and degrowing science, how to research for the future. And we'll have 3 talks over the day and 1 panel debate. And all the talks will introduce us to the concepts of growth, post-growth, green growth, this discussion, right? Technodiversity and the concept of zombie technologies. Yeah, and this is also maybe also interesting for you for the coming days to write fictional abstracts about. So maybe, yeah, you will find interesting concepts here over the course of the day. Let's start with our first talk. We're very glad to have François Briens here. He's an independent researcher in socioeconomics and an energy policy analyst in an international organization. He did his PhD in economics and prospective studies, and I believe you received it in 2015, if that's correct. Yes, okay, nice. His thesis was on prospective assessment of degrowth scenarios for France and involved participative scenario building and macroeconomic energy environment modeling. So that is a mouthful. His research interests include critical socioeconomic analysis of economic growth and development, prospective studies, energy systems, post-growth economics, and tools for democracy. So yeah, with this background, I think yeah, he's the perfect speaker for the talk that he's about to give, which is titled From Futureless Growth to Growthless Futures, Reflections on Economics and Technology for Post-Growth Societies. So yeah, thanks for being with us, François, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation and for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with a community of motivated researchers. Thank you very much for your introduction, and I guess I just have to start my talk. So yeah, so this is the title of the presentation, and in the broad line, what the question that I will try to discuss in the next 30 minutes are what are the limits of technological innovation and what role can it play in a pathway to sustainable societies. We will, in the first time, go a bit deeper in the question of ecological crisis and how green growth try to address it, and what we can expect from green growth and technological innovation, which is the heart of green growth. And in a second time of the presentation, we will, sorry. No, it was an echo. Sorry. And in the second time of the presentation, it was we will try to see what kind of research and innovation we can need for post-growth society, for post-growth era. So let me start with the first part of the topic, where we will question the economic growth, the green growth narrative, and the technological innovation narrative. So when we speak of green growth, if we come back to the definition, which was first given by OECD in 2011, green growth means fostering economic growth and development while ensuring that natural assets continue to provide the resources and environmental services on which our well-being relies. To do this, it must catalyze investment and innovation, which will underpin sustainable growth and give rise to new economic opportunities. So in this paradigm, environment is seen as a resource to be optimized, with economic growth being the end, the final goal. And we see that it gives a pivotal role to technological innovation and market mechanism in general. So that's why in the next part of the presentation, we'll try to question a bit what can be the role of technological innovation and what can we expect from technological innovation. So just to start with a few order of magnitude, some element of context, if we consider a kind of very shallow and simplistic equation to sum up a bit the climate change issue. So this is pretty much known as the Kaya identity, where we can say that CO2 emissions are a product of population multiplied by GDP per capita multiplied by the CO2 intensity of GDP. And if we take a very baseline prediction, if we just continue with current trends, if we take the projection for demographic projection from the UN from 2020 to 2050, we have a plus 27% in population at the world level. If we keep a growth rate, which was average growth rate globally between 1990 and 2019, so it's about 1.5% of growth per year. So GDP per capita would increase by almost 60% by 2050. And if we want to fit in a 1.5 degree scenario, then we see that the envelope of scenario given by the IPCC say that we need to have CO2 emission reduced by almost 90%, so divided by 10 during 2020 to 2050. And if with this element of the equation, if we solve it for the rate of evolution of the CO2 intensity of GDP, we see that we will need the CO2 intensity of the GDP to decrease to be cut by 20 between 2020 and 2050. So this requires an evolution at 9 times the pace observed over the last 30 years, and this needs to be done without exacerbating other environmental issues. So with this order of magnitude in mind, we will try to see with the rest of the discussion if it's realistic to think that we can really go that quickly in terms of progress of CO2 intensity with technological innovation. So now I'll try to paint, to present a bit the different mechanisms which make us question the role that technological innovation can have in solving the ecological crisis. It's based on a few years of very detailed modeling or energy modeling, for instance. So it's based on multiple mechanisms that we can observe in different sectors with different type of technology, etc. And I won't go into detail of each of this technology and sector, but I will try to just identify and present some key blocks of mechanism that we found in multiple places. So one of the problems that we have with innovation is declining marginal gains from innovations. This is what we call reaping the low-hanging fruits. Generally, when you have a problem, the simplest solutions are implemented first, then only remains the most costly, the most complex, and the least applicable technologies. So the one which generally leads to the lowest marginal gain in the end, which means that the rate of progress generally slow down. And you can also be facing physical limits in some sector. For instance, it applies to energy efficiency. We know that we have a maximum theoretical yield or efficiency for a thermodynamic cycle, and that's something that we can already apply with data. So if you look at this figure, it shows annual improvements in energy intensity in China from 2015 to 2019. And you see that in 2015, you had a 5.3% improvement in energy intensity, then 2016, 4.8%, etc. And you see that every year, the improvement in energy intensity is getting lower and lower. So because the easiest and the less costly technology has been implemented first, and now it becomes much more expensive and much more difficult to have additional marginal gains. So that's the problem of declining marginal gains from technological innovation. Another problem is that we have limited disruption potential in key sectors due to the slow spreading of innovation and the inertia of infrastructure and technical system. If you take the lifetime of a power plant, it's about 4 years, of building it's about 60 years, heating equipment 15 to 25 years. For transport, cars can between 12 and 15 years, etc. And that's always pretty much the amount of time that is needed to for technology to really penetrate in the technological environments. So it takes some time to be implemented, and sometimes we do not have this time. We can have some kind of push and pull innovation and innovation strategy. This is possible, which means that we force all the assets back to push the new technology in. But this is super costly because it leads to stranded assets, and society are not always willing to pay for this cost. And another question arises also is when we try to push a new technology or new innovation on the market, does it really substitute a new one, or just does it stack up on the rest of others? This is, for example, this is the example of the energy system. You see that we had a lot of innovation in terms of energy, of use of energy sources, but it doesn't mean that we stopped exploiting traditional biomass, which is still higher than in the 19th century. We added coal, then we added oil, but the increased consumption of oil doesn't mean that the consumption of coal decreased. Same for gas, and we had all the renewable energy stacking up, but it doesn't mean that our fossil fuel consumption decreased. So that's what happened. Sometimes you just have an addition of technology and not a substitution. So it's difficult for technology to really disrupt a sector due to these reasons. It can happen, of course, but another issue, which is problem shifting. Very often technological solutions tend to transform or shift problems into new ones and not just to solve them. And there's a whole bunch of examples of pseudo solution for greenhouse gas emission, where we see that nuclear, for instance, has a lower CO2 intensity as other sources, but creates problem of waste, risk of accident, dissemination, and military security. This is quite an acute problem today, given the context. And same for biofuel, you have other issues for wind, for hydro, for electric vehicles, for geoengineering, and so on and so on. It does not mean that all of these technologies are not good. It just means that the problem is just that the scale at which they will need to be developed to substitute the old one at a given level of demand make them unsustainable too, in some other way. So that's the problem. If without changing the environment, the social environment in which a technology is embedded, just shifting the technology itself might lead to new problems. And the problem that the environmental crisis is multidimensional. It's not just climate change, it's also a problem of deforestation, artificialization of soils, sorry, a lot of French in it, chemical waste, particulate matter, noise pollution, landscape degradation, pollution of water and other sanitary risks, etc., etc., etc. And you may all have seen this figure showing that we've already reached different planetary boundaries, and now if we have problem shifting from one problem to another, can we still remain in a safe operating environment? That's the question. So technological innovation, high-tech solution, generally, often at least, end up widening the spectrum of environmental risk and impacts, between which the arbitrage become more delicate as we get closer from ecological limits. Another point is rebound effect. So I've been told that you already went into this point in previous talks during this summer school, so I will pass on quite quickly on it. Generally, the definition of that is that rebound effect is an increase in consumption resulting from the reduction of obstacles and limits to the use of a technology. These obstacles can be financial, time-related, social, physical, related to hassle, danger, organization, etc. There are different mechanisms which operate behind them, and it's important to well understand them so we can anticipate rebound effect in the future. So you have economic mechanisms, which are about respending or reallocation of a saving generated by a greater efficiency in the use of the resource. You can have new practices and production that are made economically viable because of technological progress. Generally, the literature defines different types of rebound effect: first order, second order, third order. So direct rebound, indirect rebound, where it's the efficiency gains are spent in other type of products and service, and structural rebound when it impacts the overall economy due to multiple kind of feedback loops and mechanisms. Of course, the indirect and structural rebound effect are the most difficult to quantify and to reassess, but that's also the one which have the biggest impact in the end. Apart from economic mechanism, you also have psychological mechanisms and cognitive guess of interpretation, judgment, reasoning, etc. When, for instance, someone say, "Oh, the product is recyclable, so it's not a big deal if I buy a lot." You also have moral licensing effects when people loathe themselves, immoral or problematic behaviors on the basis of moral action accomplished elsewhere in the past, and the self-esteem deriving from their positive action enables them to sustain their moral self-perception by offsetting negative feelings associated with problematic behaviors. For instance, when someone say, "Oh, I already made effort to use less water when showering last month, so now I can allow myself to fly for a weekend trip." And that's that leads to different type of rebound effects, and this will mechanism are to be considered as a system of feedback mechanism. So that's why we have to think systematically about the impact of an innovation, of technological change, etc. So just to sum up, rebound effects mean that the increasing efficiency in the use of the resource does not guarantee a reduction in total consumption. It's based on the economic and cultural background, and without sufficiency and enoughness norms, there is no guarantee that environmental gains theoretically made possible by technological progresses will effectively be achieved. Another point that we can hear in the green growth narrative often is that we could dematerialize growth with services and digital technologies. There is a but, and a big but. It's that the immaterial economy does not replace the material economy. First, it's superimposed onto it. So it does not replace food, housing, mobility, etc., which are still services that we need. Digital technology relies on, well, the immaterial economy relies on the material economy. So it needs intermediate consumptions. It needs to have travel of contractor and consumer, flows of infrastructure and vehicles. There is a materiality of commercial spaces. So we need buildings, we need space to put people in relation. And materiality of technical tools, IT, servers, etc. And a third point, generally, the immaterial economy leverages the material economy, for instance, with finance, marketing, e-commerce, research and development, which accelerates obsolescence of software and hardware, etc., etc. So dematerialization is not really what's happening. And last point, also is the problem of orientation of innovation under liberal capitalism. And I will dig a bit more into that in the second part of the presentation. So the problem is that the liberal capitalism innovations are primarily motivated by profit opportunities. The aim is to maximize profitability for a maximum of production factors. So it leads to saving of labor and capital sometimes, but not necessarily of natural resources. And you have a few innovation. But in the meantime, you have many more impactful technology which are deployed. For instance, if you think of some of the big innovation that we've seen in the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, we can speak of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracking, development of sport utility vehicles, of 5G, of Bitcoin, driverless cars, tablets, and connected devices, etc. All of them are technology which led to worse impact on the environment. Of course, we could think that driving innovation market toward environmental protection, via regulation and economic incentive is possible. It is possible, but the thing is that if there is the corollary of doing this is that it will lead to a substantial modification of price systems, and it will compromise the economic viability of many productions. So it implies a deep shift in social organization in the economy and most likely contraction of GDP. So what I mean by here is that on one side, it seems to be super difficult to have economic growth without destroying the environment more. And on the other side, it is difficult to protect the environment while maintaining economic growth. So in both ways, that will work. So just to sum up, these are the different points that we discussed quickly. The conclusion is that an appropriate decoupling between economic growth and environmental impacts, thanks to technology, is unlikely. So green growth is an extremely risky bet. And I would say I won't discuss this in this presentation because I don't have time for that. But the thing that even if it was possible, the thing that economic growth mechanisms have major adverse effects on societal well-being and cultural diversity and democracy and etc. And I encourage you to have a look at all the literature on the cultural critique of growth, and that's it. So to come back to the question that we had in the beginning, we see that trying to address the problem of environmental crisis, playing only on the parameter of the the ecological intensity of GDP into technology, this is quite limited. So we see that we will have to play on the other parameters. I won't discuss population here, but on GDP per capita, GDP, PID, sorry. GDP per capita is another parameter on which we can play. So this means discussing frugality, sufficiency, and degrowth. And it's not about less of the same, not just less GDP per capita, but also, and most importantly, doing differently, having something else in the GDP and maybe something else than GDP. So this highlights the need to rethink economic organizations and lifestyles. In the next slides now, I will try to show what could a post-growth and degrowth pathway look like. Now that we say that we need to imagine a world where GDP can decrease, what could it look like? Does it need to be what we call a recession? Do we need to lead to a crisis and so on, or can it be imagined in a different way and maintain social well-being? So I will just present one scenario, which is a scenario I made and studied in my PhD. The scenario was built on a participative process, with a participative process. It was based on semi-directed interviews with people from the degrowth movements. And the question that I was trying to ask in general is, what is your vision of transition toward a desirable and sustainable society? And we will discuss all the different thematic, transport, consumption of different type of goods and products, and going in the nitty-gritty of the detail of how do we do with washing machine, how do we do with clothes, how do we do with public transport and mobility in general, and how do we do with I don't know, leisure, culture, and going to all these different thematics through interviews and translating them into scenarios to put in a numerical simulation model of the French economy, which is based on extended input-output modeling. So here are the thing that interview lasted about 10 hours each. So it's difficult to sum up all the assumptions, but I will try to give just a picture of main assumptions which are in this scenario. So for housing, for instance, there was an assumption of shared housing, so an increase in the average size of household and multifunctionality of buildings as well, which are used not just for school, for instance, but also for a lot of community activities and so on. In terms of consumption of goods and service, a lot of subvertive, do-it-yourself, and local manufacturing, with assumption of increasing product lifetime, with increasing quality and so on, to increasing the cost as well, but of the working time required to manufacture them. Assumption of decreasing ownership rates for equipment through sharing and commoning, and overall all this leads to a decrease in the final consumption of goods and services. Agriculture, there was a simulation of a shift toward 100% organic agriculture by 2060, with applications, permaculture, etc. For transport, decreased a lot. And there is a huge modal shift to active mobility and public transport and train, and the share of cars becomes very marginal. This is the type of assumption which are in the scenario. As you can see here below, sorry, this is the modal shares as a function of the distance for a trip. And what you see in red for 2010, this is for France, this is the share of car in mobility. And this in 2060 is the assumption that we put in the scenario. So the share of car is below 10% for most of the trip category, and generally it's bike and public transport which take over for short distance, and bike, train, buses for long distance. Assumption of relocalization and short circuits, decreasing working time, very limited productivity gains, sometimes negative in different subsectors based on the assumption that people will work more to substitute some kind of energy consumption or machinery. Public service and budget, well, a lot of different assumptions. I won't go into detail of each of them, but just in terms of technological progress, there are very modest assumptions with improvement in energy and that's which are assumed to decrease and almost stagnate beyond 2050. Not so high refurbishment for buildings, relocation of thermal comfort norms, limited efficiency gains in equipment, and innovation is mostly low-tech in this scenario. So this is the result of the modeling. You can see in the blue, the blue line, that the dark blue line, that aggregate consumption is divided by almost 2 in this scenario. So GDP in red is also divided by also 2, more or less. The number of hours worked decreased, but not as much, because we say productivity is not always declining, and the sectors, the consumption which decreased the most are the ones which were actually not so work intensive. So the number, and because the work time decreased, this allowed to maintain the number of jobs pretty much stable, and we managed to reach a pretty low unemployment rate in this scenario. This is the evolution of the public budget deficit, etc., based on different assumptions. We managed to reach a division by 4 of energy consumption in terms of energy footprint, not just production-based, but consumption-based. And the footprint, the CO2 footprint is divided by almost 5. So this is just one example. So the question now is, are the scenario hypotheses achievable? And if yes, how can research contribute to make them achievable? So how can research contribute to increasing sharing of equipment, reduction of consumption, and so on and so on? I would like to just zoom also on the evolution of public administration revenue in this scenario. As you see, so this whole area is the revenue from for public administrations, so for government budgets, and you see that it's almost divided by 2. So this raises a question that you might want to discuss at a later stage today. It's what budget do we want to dedicate to public research, and how can we carry public research with lower budgets or with lower resources, or in a degrowing context. So yeah. Based on this scenario, we have a set of different conditions for sustainable degrowth. So we need, can identify first that we will need to mutualize resource, infrastructure, and tools to make it more socially sustainable. We will need to have work time reduction and work sharing if we want to avoid high unemployment. Reduction of inequalities and redistribution of wealth. Of course, we need to guarantee the economic security and serenity of people. And we need democratic planning of degrowth scenario, just not only for the fact that we need investment visibility, and we need to be able to assess the financial viability of projects in order to avoid stranded assets and stranded investment. We need to adapt public budgets to declining public revenue. We need to anticipate social needs, etc. And last point is that direct citizen participation with continued direct democracy is very important to avoid bureaucratism. We don't want USSR. Few proposals which were explored in this scenario and which will deserve to be discussed more. It's political control of prices for basic needs. For example, what do we do with housing rents, with health, etc.? Do we want to have political control of the price for these sectors because we consider them to be too important to be left to the market? Can we have can we also explore unconditional autonomy allowance and income ceiling, like basic income sort of? Do we want to explore the partial demonetization of public services, where people allow the public services to work not by giving money to the state, but by contributing with their time? How to develop a sharing economy, a reciprocity economy, organic solidarity also, and command, and how to develop an economy of saving, which means an economy which pays off with what it saves rather than what it produces. So how can research, innovation, etc. contribute to this? That's a question. And now, in this last part of the presentation, we'll try to go into what kind of research and innovation we need for sustainable societies. So what we talked so far, from what we talked so far, we saw that beyond technological innovation, we need to rethink and redesign lifestyle, socioeconomic relationship, spatial and temporal organization in our societies, and this will require a lot of experimentation. Just theoretical research won't tell us everything, so we need time and resources to experiment. There is a good news that the ecological reconstruction is already conceivable with existing technologies and knowledge. A lot of scenarios can be based just on existing technologies, renewable energy, bikes, public transit system, permaculture, biosource material for insulation, etc., etc. And we don't need to have this kind of backstop technology to save us in our scenarios, but we need to be aware that the scale and pace of diffusion needed for scenario to work calls for a full mobilization of the economy and society. I mean, it's something equivalent of a war economy that we need to really go full throttle on in this new paradigm. And technological innovation and research could help, for instance, by facilitating democratic, cultural, and social transformations. But in order to yield progress, it needs to meet several conditions, which we will discuss now. So first, innovation and progress must allow for systemic sufficiency, for sobriety, for frugality. And for this, it needs to anticipate and avoid problem shifting. So what we discussed before, we need to think life cycle. We need to have a multi-criteria analysis in order to really avoid silo thinking and just very sectoral improvement while trashing the other sectors. We need to anticipate and avoid the rebound effect. So we need to think innovation in relation with their cultural and socioeconomic environment over the longer term. So we need to have a prospective thinking on innovation. We need to always have this kind of long-term thinking and broad thinking of, if this kind of technology develop, what will happen in society? How would people appropriate this technology? What kind of effect of impact could it have on all different sectors? We need also to shortcut what Ivan Illich called technological detours. Let me give an example of a technological detour, which is exemplified by the concept of generalized speed. This is from Ivan Illich and Jean-Pierre Dupuis, who set up this concept by considering that speed is equal to distance divided by time needed to go through it. And in addition to just accounting for the time spent in driving the car, they account for the time spent working to pay it, to maintain and to repair it, to pay parking, to pay insurance, etc., etc. And when you include all the time that you need to pay for that, this is the generalized speed that you have for different transport technology. Bike, the chevaux, it's a very cheap old car, and then Simca is a higher level car, and DS21 is more of a luxurious car, etc. And so you get a speed which is, so this was the calculation made in 1976 people made the same, pretty much the same calculation more recently. The difference was a bit smaller, but still the conclusion is pretty much the same. So what you see is that acceleration generates inequalities. The generalized speed is not for the same transport technology is not the same for senior executives as for a factory worker, because it takes more time for a factory worker to gather the money to pay for technology. So it generates inequalities, and also you can see that back is maybe the optimal transport technology in the end. So this is an example, and that's a comic strip that pretty much illustrate that. So I hate driving, but I need 2 cars to get to work, and I hate my job, but I gotta make car payments. And also in terms of system thinking on the right, it's people in a traffic jam saying, if this idiot had taken the bus, I would already be home, and always thinking the same, all of them thinking the same. So that raises the question of what is the ultimate goal of technology, of the technology that we want. So we need to shortcut and suppress technological detours. We need to facilitate commoning and mutualization of tools and resources. And we need to collectively question our needs and hierarchize and prioritize our wants. And let me just make this more deep question, which is not one. Needs are different from satisfiers, and what in the common language we understand as a need is often a satisfier. For instance, if we speak of a need for a car, it's not a need for a car. A car is a satisfier for some kind of mobility, and mobility is itself a satisfier for another need. And if we, based on Manfred Max Neef, was a Chilean economist who worked on fundamental human needs. His approach is very enlightening. He has identified just a finite number of needs which can be applied to all the societies that he studied through his work. And these fundamental needs are subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, usefulness, creation, identity, freedom, which he declines into being, having, doing, and interacting. And that gives a matrix of needs and satisfiers. For instance, you have a need of subsistence, which can be met by having a food, a shelter, a work, etc. And so you have different types of satisfiers. You identify singular satisfiers, which meet only one need, synergetic satisfiers, which meets multiple needs at the same time. For instance, breastfeeding, it meets the need of subsistence, but also of affection and etc. You have inhibitors, satisfiers. For instance, if you think of very let's say paternalist education, then you can meet some need of protection maybe, but not of participation, not of creation, and so on. So you inhibit other needs. And you can have satisfiers like arm race, for instance, which is supposed to meet a need of protection, but in fact it just increases insecurity across the world. And you can have, or it's even a violator satisfier in this case. So yeah. So you have different types of satisfiers, and what we need to do is to redesign our social system of satisfiers to meet the ultimate need in the end, not just intermediate need, but think of the ultimate need and see how to optimize the social system of satisfiers to have the most synergetic ones and the least pseudo and violator satisfiers. Other few points to consider before I conclude. Assessment criteria for technologies and innovation should include not only environmental impact, but also socio-cultural dimensions in terms of social autonomy, of technology capability. So can we ensure that technology understanding and appropriation can be done by all? What is the appropriate scale of development, of production and relocation for different technology? How to arbitrate between local craftsmanship and wide-scale industry? What is the place that we want to give to high-tech versus low-tech, etc. And also another question, it's conversely, what kind of society and what kind of humanity are being produced by technologies? In particular for digital technologies and information and communication technologies, when we think of cybernetics, etc. Does the technological system generate inequality, heteronomy, independence, power concentration? Is it compatible with democratic processes and organization? Does it alter cognitive capabilities for humanity and so on, etc.? This is a whole different type of question that we need to consider when we think of innovation and progress. And how to ensure that innovation yields social progress? Well, we will need to go down to the definition of progress, which is a coordinated evolution towards predefined ends. And that poses the question of who defines the end? And same when you have some kind of problem shifting issue, who arbitrates, who judges the trade-off between impacts of different nature? Who can say that this type of impact is preferable to this one? Also in terms of relevance, if you think that innovation is useful or not, which need is being met and whose need is being met by the innovation. So that's the question of who decides what is a progress and what is not. And that's why if we want to account for pluralism of value, we need to have a very much more democratic way of thinking of scientific and technological choices. So we need a citizen reappropriation of scientific and technical choice. And this can be done by different processes or tools. Let me just mention a few ones. So first of all, citizen conventions. This is a process of participation which combines a preliminary training during which citizens study a problem, active intervention during which citizens can interview and question different experts or stakeholders to improve their understanding, and a collective deliberation and the positioning phase where citizens deliver an advice or take a decision. This is a framework which has been developed by SICT, which is an association I'm part of in France, which work on democratization of scientific practices. And it can be applied to marketing authorization for technologies, to the orientation of public research strategy and funding, etc. And talking about orientation of public research strategies and funding, let me mention an initiative which stems from France, which is called Horizontaire, and it's a collective project to develop concrete proposal to the alternative proposal to the EU research strategy, which is called Horizon Europe, in the field of health, agriculture, energy, housing, mobility, and to submit them to the public debate. So if you have time, I encourage you to have a look at the report that was produced by this collective, where they offer different tracks, different thematics, different research questions that they advocate and that they want would be more relevant, that they think would be more relevant than the EU strategy in terms of research and more compatible with a sustainable world. Also, an important point I want to make is it's important to develop participative research where citizens are involved in the entire process from the definition of the problem to the assessment of result and choice of methodology, etc. Not just data collection, which is contributive science, which is part of it, but something else. Participative research where really it's demand-driven, it's community-driven. And one example is science shops, which exist in different countries, which is a facility attached to a university that provides independent participatory research support in response to concern experienced by civil society. So it's a community-based and driven research. People go to the university section, to the science shop, and say, well, okay, we as citizens have this problem. We would like to understand this. We would like to, etc. And researchers help them and say, okay, let's define together how we can address this issue.
Okay. Yeah, we would really need to stop here. But thank you so much for this very, very dense, very interesting. Okay. So maybe we can take those conclusions into into our mind and think about this further. I think there's lots in here for fictional abstracts, because this is really about future and research that needs to be done. But now we have about 7 to 8 to maybe 10 minutes for Q&A. So I would ask you, François, to also keep your answers short if possible. Yeah. And we'll start over there. Yeah. Can
we just see how many questions we have, just to have an idea?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so yeah, please keep the answers short, but yeah, thank you so much. Let's go with the questions.
I will keep the question short. So you consider in your presentation that GDP and CO2 impacts are correlated variables. So is it a simplification? how different it is from reality, and what implication does it have to the recommendation that you've been providing? And thank you very much for the presentation.
It's correlated just because it's based on physical mechanism. It's just that when you have GDP production, which means you have an exchange of value, and you have a creation of value and exchange of and a modification of material and energy in the system, and this generates CO2 emission, especially based on the energy system that we have. It's something we can partially decorrelate it by using different energy technologies and so on, but this takes a lot of time, and that's what correlation will remain for the next decade for sure, to some extent. Not sure for the end of the question.
Yep. Yeah, I think the question was answered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your mind-blowing talk. I have a question. How much do you think like universities, like for example, economy or management faculties are ready for this kind of discourses in like bachelor level? And like in your case, were you invited to give talks in universities to students, or do you think we are still far from that? Because I think that could be a starting point to infuse these kind of ideas.
I would say there is still a freedom in university to discuss this topic, and we need to say it because it's a bit like, well, it's when you don't use it, that's when it disappears. So yeah, I was invited to various schools and like grandes écoles in France, engineering schools, and very recently I'm invited to give an introductory course in HEC, which is a very famous business school in France. So that's definitely not the type of schools where I would have thought just a few years ago I would be invited to talk about degrowth. And there is a strong demand from students, from researchers and teachers, and also from the world pedagogical team in many universities to develop the thematic of degrowth, because there is demand about it. People want to understand what's, I mean, there's a lot of, the Greek growth narrative is still alive in the economic world, but in the academic, not that much. And there is a big need for having more insights about degrowth scenarios and degrowth narratives, and understanding what kind of alternative economy can exist and so on. So I'm pretty optimistic with the academic world and the students, which are very aware of the issue and very critical. On the other side, working in a big international organization, I can tell you that there are a lot of very institutional breaks and obstacles, and it will take a bit of time. But the thing that civil society is the one that will set the base for political change and political pressures, and that's all the rest of the economy, the mainstream economy, will to follow and adapt at the end. So I'm not overly optimistic, but I see that in the mind of people it's changing. We need to translate it into concrete economical change in the end.
Thank you for your very interesting talk. There was a lot to dig in this. I just had a question about, at a certain point you say conditions for degrowth, and then you say, or the slides mention, guaranteeing economic security and people's serenity. And that sounds like so easy to say, but so hard to do.
Yes. Well, maybe it's not that hard to do. I mean, that the proposal of basic income, for instance, is one possible option. I'm not sure it's the best one. I'm not sure it will work, but I mean, that's one simple possibility to ensure that everyone has a minimum threshold of resources and can meet the specific needs, basic needs. There's also a possibility to take some needs out of the market system, like housing and etc., and have it very politically managed. And that's, I mean, there are different ways to ensure that basic needs are met. But of course, it's a radical change in the world economic structure and the world social relationship and how we are used to it. And we think that sometimes it's just about practices which are not even 1 century old, but they look, it seems to us that it's absolutely impossible, that are set into work and that we cannot change them. But 1 century in the scale of humanity is nothing. So, no, there's a lot to, and there have been experimentation about basic income and what we call unconditional autonomy allowance. It's a sort of basic income, which is not given in money, but given in services or access to housing, access to water, energy, etc. So there are different types of things. But the thing, what I wanted to insist is that if you guarantee the security of the economic security of people, a big driver of economic growth is the fear of people to be in economic trouble. And a lot of people would work less, just consume less, etc., and try to have a more sustainable lifestyle if they knew that in the next years they won't be forced into harsh economic conditions. So it's a lot about making people feeling reassured that we can guarantee their economic security.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I saw your slides about the need for popular repatriation of scientific discourse and technical knowledge. You mentioned the association Sciences Citoyennes, but I would like to know if you have an opinion or if you know the state provides solution like a consultative committee of ethics, or in French, Comité Consultatif National d'Éthique. And if you have opinion on this, I would be interested.
I have opinion on this. Basically, well, factually, when we look at what they have been doing, they have just been allowing everything that they have not been putting a monopoly on. So basically, they do not, well, the thing that, first of all, they are not very citizen-based. They are kind of expert-based, and expert of a certain type of culture and belong from a certain social class, and they are not representative of the population needs and wants. So so it does not work really well for that. Plus, yeah, the question is also why, in the end, have they been implemented? If you look for everything about bioethics, for instance, we can see that historically is just that everything which was considered as ethically impossible first was then becoming ethically okay depending on certain condition. Then the condition become a little bit slacker, and then it become allowed, and so on. And that's the same for every. We see that it just slowed down the process of implementation of a new innovation or technology, but in the end, the result has always been the same, which is just allowing it and kind of stamping it with, okay, ethically correct, society can go on, even though within society there are strong voices against it. So, so I would say the functioning of this institution is not perfect and not satisfactory yet, and we will need a much more citizen-based institution and much more room for democratic debate and conflicting debate as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have maybe time for like 2 very short questions and answers. So let's try to go for it.
Thank you for the talk. I will try to keep it short. As you put in this slide, when we need to repolitize and democratize the orientation of research and innovation, it doesn't seem to be compatible with the pyramidal structure of our administration in France and the political construction of the state. We may think that we need to decentralize the decision power. Is there anything in the world currently that is adequate to this shift to another model? And any idea about the scale it should take?
It's a difficult question. It's a bit a chicken and egg problem also in some way. I would say that researchers have some kind of margin already in the way they carry research, in which kind of research they want to develop or not, whether they want to make it more participative or not, etc. They can create more demand for participative research. There have been in France, for instance, different like institutional support for participative research with ADEME, which is quite active in the area. Of course, it's not really the type of, it's not the paradigm that our government is right now. And I think that there is a need for big mobilization from scientists, which are, which still have some power and they can wait politically, but they need to collectively act and wait on the decision, not only at the national level, but the European level, because a lot of the funding for research is at the European level. And I really encourage you to look at the European research strategy, like Horizon Europe, and also have a look at Horizontaire, the initiative which I mentioned, and try to discuss it with colleagues and create some momentum around it. And then it's another social fight, and it will need a specific strategy, which I don't have at hand. So, sorry.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. In your degrowth scenario, you mentioned that we will work less. There is a reduction of work, but given the fact that we will relocalize and do permaculture, agriculture with less mechanization, why do you think we will work less in this scenario?
So working time is a variable that depends on different things: productivity and amount of production that is needed. So the amount of production that is needed will decrease. So normally, this pushes the demand for work down. But at the same time, you can have decreasing productivity based on what you say. For instance, more work-intensive agriculture, which allow more sustainable agricultural practices. You can have also the fact that you use less fossil fuel energy, and so you require more labor and more more human-centered technologies, etc. So this can reduce what economists call productivity, that is the amount of output per hour of work, of human work. And you can have a balance at different points. But the thing that in the scenario that I modeled, the assumptions I took in terms of evolution of productivity and evolution of consumption and production, and also accounting for relocalization. So the scenario accounts for the relocation of activities in France while they were manufactured outside. And well, in this scenario, our model tells me, the model which I built tells me that work time reduction can be 25 to 30% for the production need that we have on average. So it's not, I mean, it's based on assumption which can be questioned and so on. The thing that the reduction in consumption and production has an impact of higher magnitude that the reduction of productivity due to more labor-intensive practices. So we can hope for reduced working hours. But then, if you're in a degrowth scenario, you can also question the relevance of the concept of work, because you have a lot of activity which, when they are not done for the market, when it's a lot of do-it-yourself and so on, sometimes it's really borderline between, it's not monetized or marketized. It can be done as a personal activity. Sometimes it can be done as leisure as well. And the border between what is part of monetary work and life activities, autonomous activities, becomes a bit blurred in some way. So, so the concept of work itself needs to be revisited in a degrowth scenario.
Okay, thank you so much for the response. I think the question was answered. Yes. Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, thank you so much for the talk. Let's give a big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, François. And we will transition to the next speaker now. Thank you. See you.